Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled Diner Nightmare. This happened several years ago, around 2017. I had left college the year before and already had a job in a small family-owned restaurant and was looking for a second job so that my roommate and I could save up to get our own apartment. We were living with her family at the time, and roomie was also searching for a job. She was having a harder time of it due to multiple leg injuries as well as other health complications. But eventually, we found a restaurant that was getting ready to open, and it was on the same street as my current job. I picked up 2 applications on my way into work one morning, and turned in the filled applications the next day. On my day off, we went in for our interviews, and at the start the manager said, "This is really just a formality, I'm going to hire you both anyway," and we both thought that was a good sign. The new restaurant was going to be a 24-hour diner, similar to Denny's and Waffle House. The lady who gave our interviews used to be a WH manager, but it was 50s themed, and it was across the street from several bars. As the interior of the restaurant was still under construction, no one outside of management and construction crew could be in the restaurant for the next few weeks. And the management told us that they would text us when it was time to start training. Yeah, make that about 2 months before we hear about any sort of training, already not a good sign. Once training started, it became clear that these people had no clue what the hell they all needed to do. You know how a restaurant is on kitchen nightmares before Gordon Ramsay comes and does an overhaul? Yeah, pick one of the worst restaurants and you're getting close to the crap this place pulled. Can't take any breaks no matter how long your shift is, can't be seen rehydrating in front of customers, and don't get me started on what we found in some of the food. One thing I also forgot to mention earlier, this was a 2-story restaurant. Remember those multiple leg injuries that my roommate has that I mentioned earlier? She made sure that the management knew about it, and they said each time that they wouldn't put her upstairs. That night of the soft opening, it was clear that they had lied, because they put her upstairs, meaning that she would have to go up and down the stairs to get the food for her tables multiple times a night with a bad leg. And when she asked to switch sections with another girl, the managers told her to get over it. One of the other waitresses was the manager's niece, and major favoritism was given to her. This girl had no clue what the hell that she needed to do. She kept dropping everything, took forever to key orders in the computer system, and couldn't even mix a basic vanilla milkshake. On the soft opening night, the niece and my roommate were in similar sections, and my roommate would often help out the niece with figuring out the system. Slightly in the niece's defense, this system was a witch and would repeatedly crash multiple times a day. Well, guess who went to her auntie and said that my roommate had shoved her off of the computers and was stealing her customers. After the soft opening, the managers just seemed to be itching for a reason to fire me and my roommate, but they couldn't because neither of us had any write-ups, and any bullying accusations that the niece tried to pin on us were quickly disproved by other waitresses. And then the restaurant started opening for real. July 13, 2017 was when the pot boiled over. This was one of my days off, but roomie had to work that night. My aunt and uncle from Minnesota were in town that night, and my parents called me and offered to all go to dinner that night at the diner to help support my roommate. Well, kitchen ducks up again, and it's so bad that my uncle asks to speak to the manager. He was very open to my family about what his complaint was. Kitchen had royally ducked up the Reuben sandwich that he had ordered. But manager told roomie that my uncle's complaint was about her service. I stayed behind, since I was her ride, and family left. She was in a section downstairs this time. About half an hour after family leaves, I had a milkshake on hold and look around the restaurant and realize that I don't see roomie. I had seen her a little bit ago leaning against the wall and figured her leg was bothering her, but I don't see her anymore, so I start looking for someone to ask them for that milkshake. Almost as soon as I realize this, I see her coming down the stairs. She doesn't look towards me, but instead goes behind the milkshake bar, and I hear her politely ask for one of the other waitresses to let her by so that she can get her backpack. As soon as I heard that, my heart dropped. I knew exactly what had happened, why she had been upstairs. That's where the office was. I packed up when I saw her go into the restroom, and she come out in her street clothes. We had uniforms at this diner. I was ready to go, and one of the hosts comes over to us asking if we were okay. She brushes by him and exits the building, and I simply tell him to cancel the milkshake and follow roomie out of the restaurant. He follows us asking if everything's okay, and Rumi turns around and exclaims, "They fired me because I leaned against the wall for 45 seconds. Oh, hell no." I ask her to wait for me and go back into the building. Fortunately for me, one of the managers is already downstairs, and I call to her to get her attention. Thanks to theater, I know how to project my voice, and I make sure that the whole building can hear me when I tell her, "Because you fired my roommate over an injury that she made sure you were aware of, you can consider my employment terminated as well." Come to find out the whole story from Rumi later, managers had been creating false write-ups for her and false complaints, like my uncle's, and all sorts of other crap, like the fake bullying charges, to use as an excuse to get rid of her. And now comes the part that you've been waiting for, the revenge. See, Rumi's family knows some people who are pretty high up in the city, state, such as the city sheriff, and one of the senators of our state. So, one of her family members got her a meeting with said senator and she told him everything that this diner had done. He gave her the contact information to both the labor board, as well as a little company called OSHA. Don't know if you've heard of them. While she got in contact with them, I started a hashtag on Facebook, spreading the story, and asking my friends to do the same. Whenever she and I were in town together and were having conversations with the locals, any time that the conversation turned to good restaurants in the area, we made sure to warn them about the treatment that they gave to their staff, and asked them to spread their story. It got to the point where Rumi even overheard other people, even lawyers, talking about it on the streets and in the coffee shop that she stayed in while waiting for me to get off of work. My boss at my primary job knew everything that was going on at this diner, having heard both me and Rumi express our concerns and frustrations. And once we were no longer working there, she and the rest of her staff joined us in cracking jokes and throwing major shade at this diner. I still remember fondly to this day her saying that the drunks are the only reason that place is staying open. Even some of my co-workers were lurking for dirt on this diner, and on November 13, 2017, literally 4 months to the day that they pulled that crap, the cook at my job asks me, "So, did you hear that the diner's closed now?" Wait, what? I had to pull out my phone and check. Sure enough, there it was in the local news, the diner was closing their doors, effective immediately. The excuse that they gave was management change and that it was only temporary, but to this day, the space that the diner had occupied is still boarded up. Rumi and I went out for celebratory milkshakes that night. We didn't expect that the whole place would be closed down, but we do not regret making those calls or Facebook posts. The next one is titled, "Trick Me Out of My Laptop, You'll Give Me Your Car." 13 years ago I was in my late teens, living on my own and really struggling to live financially. One of the few possessions I had was an old laptop. My laptop had stopped working properly, and while I'm fairly proficient in using a computer, I had no idea about fixing them. I did a bit of searching on the internet but couldn't get it working, so I asked my stepdad to take a look. He has a quick look and says it ducked, but he'll take it off my hands if I don't want it, so I said sure. If it's broken then it's no good to me. 10 minutes later I walk in the room and he's using it. I asked if he fixed it and he says, "Yeah, thanks for the laptop." I was obviously upset. My mum says she wasn't getting involved, and his only response was that he did a quick internet search to find the fix and I could have done the same. I was broke and he took one of my only possessions even though he had a PC and a laptop already. A few months later I was visiting my mum and stepdad when I had an idea. While I am useless with computers, I'm very competent with mechanics. Specifically Audis, and my stepdad had a 2001 Audi A3. Before coming in the house I went under his car and unplugged the oil level sensor and a VAC line for the turbo. Later on that day he went to go to the shop or something. When he started the car it threw up oil warning lights on the dash and wouldn't boost, so he turned it off and had a look of concern on his face. I went out to ask him what's up and he said that something gone majorly wrong. He says something along the lines of catastrophic turbo failure or engine failure. He's already spent quite a bit on repairs and didn't want to spend any more money on it, so spoke to my mum about just cutting his losses and scrapping it. I asked how much it's worth at the scrap yard and he says £100, so I ever so graciously offer £120 to take it off his hands to maybe part it out, which he accepts. He signed over the logbook, title, and wrote me a receipt of purchase and handed the keys over. I walked outside, lifted the bonnet, pretended to look at my phone for a minute, went under the car and plugged the VAC line and oil sensor back in, fired it straight up and drove around the block. When I got back I gave him the thumbs up and said it's all fine now. His mouth was wide open and he was mega upset, and my reply was, "You could have found the solution too with a quick internet search." He tried arguing that it wasn't fair and if it's working then I can't just take his car. But I just said he didn't have a problem tricking me out of my laptop and that he's already signed the car over to me, so tough luck. My mum kinda laughed and said she's not getting involved and that it was his own fault. I still have the car to this day and it's practically in showroom condition and runs sweet. The next one is titled, "This is how I stopped the gossip for good." My mum had a fairly consistent habit of gossiping and sharing quite personal information around. We knew she was doing it, but she would adamantly deny having ever done such a thing. I wish I could remember what she did that finally made me snap. It can't even have been that important. It was just the millionth time, and for once I wanted her to admit what she'd done and know that we knew too. So we set up the sting. My friend Jane and I approached my mum and told her that Jane was pregnant. She wasn't ready to tell her mum yet and she was really worried what people would think about her having a baby so young. She didn't want anyone to know yet, so it had to be top secret. Having set the trap, I figured within a few weeks or so I would have some evidence we could use, but I was so wrong. The very next day my sister, grandma and neighbor all asked me how my young pregnant friend was doing. When I was asked by a lady who worked at the supermarket that same day, I figured this had gone far enough and went home to confront my mum, only to have my dad ask how Jane was doing. I confronted my mum, right there in front of my dad, which is when she started with the usual "I would never do that, they must have heard from someone else" routine. I explained very shortly and clearly that we had fed her a lie to see how far it spread, and the reaction was glorious. My mum's mouth fell open and she just had nothing to say at all. My dad on the other hand fell back on the sofa roaring with laughter, bemoaning the fact he hadn't thought of this years ago. It was a moment I will treasure forever, and the point was thoroughly made. Now that my mum was aware of what had happened, I was able to satisfy all further inquiries towards my friend's health with the true story, and my mum's audience for any further gossip was somewhat reduced. The last one is titled, "Last Minute Professor Turns into a Nightmare, I Make Sure She Never Has a Job There Again." About 10 years ago I was attending a local community college for my associates in fine arts. In retrospect it was dumb to do so after the economy had tanked from the 2008 recession, but I digress. In my second year during the first semester, one class one had to take to advance and be on track to graduate on time was drawing 2. In this class one was supposed to learn color theory and work on advanced drawing techniques as well as build a portfolio for any future college attendance. The professor that usually taught the class had a family emergency near the beginning of the semester, so they found a replacement from among the local art scene. The school did their best, but she was woefully underqualified and was a recent college graduate with a master's in fine art. She believed she was giving us the best education possible, but to a fault. She thought she knew it all, and because we were just students we knew nothing. She almost always smelled like a dirty litter box and was covered in cat hair as well. From day one I knew I wasn't going to get along with her. One of the first exercises she had us do was gesture drawing, which for some reason ended up being almost the entire focus of that semester. We walked in one day to all the desks arranged around a giant display of almost every single object the art rooms had in storage. I'm talking mannequins, chairs, ladders, plants, clothing, you name it, all in the center of the room, standing nearly 10 feet tall and 20 feet long. She told us all to pick a seat and pull out our 18x24 vellum drawing pads. For those who don't know, they're high-quality paper and very expensive. At first I took it as a wonderful challenge, since clutter has always been a struggle of mine. There was a lot of foreshortening and other tricky things I could practice my skills on. That optimism was short-lived, however. After 10 minutes we were all rudely stopped by a whistle and told to stand up, leave our paper and move to the seat on the left and work on that drawing. I asked her why and to explain what the point of the exercise was, and she said to practice different angles of the same subject. I asked why we couldn't just use newsprint, which was far cheaper, and start a new drawing. She said to stop asking questions and just do what I was told. So that's what I did. The remainder of the class one spent most of my time correcting other people's mistakes, though I probably just had a different perspective since we all were different heights. It was a very frustrating day for me and my classmates. It was about 2 weeks into the semester and many students that didn't need the class dropped out at that point before they took a hit to their GPA. This was just the beginning of the issues I had with her, and I was already formulating a way to get back at her. Our midterm was next on the list of problems. She had decided to give us a challenge involving working in large scale. We were required to turn in a completed 10 feet by 6 feet drawing, and we had 2 weeks to do it. This enormous project had to be done on top of all my other midterm assignments, many of which were research papers that were also time-consuming. I also had a part-time job. I had very little sleep and rushed the last half of the drawing just so I wasn't given a failing grade for not meeting her requirements. It was totally useless for my portfolio. At this point we still had not delved into color theory or made anything I would call worthy of my portfolio. Me and a friend in the class decided to voice our concerns to the Dean of Arts at this point. The Dean was already slightly concerned because we had about 10 students remaining out of an original 30. All who were left were in the same boat as me. We had to finish the class in order to graduate on time. The Dean said she would sit in on the next project's critique to see how she was handling her classes. The next project was a charcoal study, once again no color theory. It was simply an 18x24 still life done on vellum. Halfway though we had a progress critique and the Dean sat in to watch. I could tell the professor was a nervous wreck. She stumbled through the critiques and gave almost no useful help to some of the less talented students. Afterwards the Dean told my friend and I that she would make sure we would at least get a passing grade for the class. But there was nothing she could do about replacing her. Having this information made the last 4 weeks of the semester very sweet indeed. I used every opportunity to question the professor's lessons and frustrate her. She was quite literally like Professor Umbridge and I felt like Harry Potter, the difference being she couldn't harm me. My friend and I had been talking to the rest of our classmates and we all couldn't stand her. The final project was only the beginning of my revenge. Once again we had no color but I was determined to make this piece usable for my portfolio. She set up a twisted, knotted fitted bed sheet on a piece of plywood and shined a light at an angle to give us a chance to do a detailed study of light values. I got super detailed. My drawing ended up being hyper-realistic. I was so focused on a small portion of it that it ended up being smaller than her 18x24 requirement. She said she would lower my grade for that reason unless I made it fill the whole page. I went straight to the Dean with that. The Dean assured me that would not happen and that she would be sitting in on the final critique. She also mentioned that she would be giving our class sheets for an evaluation of our professor's performance for the semester. She also informed me that the sheets would determine her future employment with the college. The Dean watched and I ended up getting an A for the assignment, even after cropping it down so there wasn't a huge amount of white space. Did I mention throughout this whole semester we were told to keep a drawing journal? We had to show at least 3 pages of work at the end of each week or we were docked points. Multiple times she stated that my sketches were barely enough to qualify for her marks. One of the requirements for our final was being given an evaluation by our professor in a one-on-one setting. She brought me into her office and we looked over my portfolio for the semester. She criticized everything I did and had no useful feedback, then had the audacity to ask me to go easy on her evaluation. The Dean had told me she wasn't supposed to do that, so of course I wasn't going to let that go. The final day of classes our professor handed out the evaluation sheets and gave a short speech about how, "I hope you all had a wonderful semester and I hope you have nothing but good to say about my first teaching experience." We were not required to put our names on them since she would be seeing them at a later point. She also had to leave the room while we were filling them out and I knew the Dean was going to come in and collect the sheets, so I was brutally honest. I ended up writing a page and a half about what I did not like about her class. I know my classmates mostly did the same. It basically turned into a group project where we all reminded each other of some of the things she had done throughout the semester. The school made it easy too. One of the questions I remember it asking was, "How likely would you be to recommend this professor teach here again?" Not at all. After the Dean collected them, she glanced over some of them, gave us a sincere apology and told the class that we would all be passing. She would have most of us in her painting class the next semester. As far as I know, that professor was never invited back to the school and was probably blacklisted from most schools in the area. She was told at the beginning of the semester what the requirements for the class were and she met none of them. When I had the Dean as my painting instructor, she ended up having to take a week to teach us all the color theory we were supposed to have already learned. Thankfully she is a wonderful teacher and we all caught on fast. Thanks for listening.